from Kansas State University. This is Agriculture Today. Eric Atkinson with you, and here's what's coming up. K-State's Dan O'Brien visits with Jeff Wickman here in a moment about the grain market trends. Dan comments on the latest grain supply and demand report from the USDA and remarks on the markets taking a wait-and-see position on row crop planting progress amid ongoing wet field conditions. Also, K-State's Terry Griffin and Gregg Ibendahl report on their latest economic analysis of the top farms economically in Kansas. This time, they looked at how machinery investments affect that farm profitability, and the result was just the opposite of what they had expected. Later on then, on Kansas agricultural weather, K-State's Mary Knapp, plus more ahead on Agriculture Today.
Hamburgers, roast, ribs, steak, or whatever you prefer. Beef, it's what's for dinner. Kansas cattle farmers produce 7.5 million head of cattle per year. It takes about 7 tablespoons of peanut butter to get the same amount of protein in 1 serving of lean beef. Support your local Kansas farmers and ranchers. Eat beef. This message was brought to you by the K-State Animal Sciences Leadership Academy participants.
You're listening to Agriculture Today. I'm Jeff Wickman. Up first, our weekly look at the activity taking place in the grain market. K-State grain market economist Dan O'Brien says the markets are seemingly in a holding pattern, waiting to see just how much the moisture will impact acres planted this spring. He also says there are some implications from a couple of recently released grain market reports from USDA.
The USDA put out the April 9th World Agricultural Supply and Demand Estimates reports, which followed on the heels of their grain stocks and prospective planting reports that they had put out right at the very end of March. So the livestock feed use numbers in particular out of that and applied that to the corn and the wheat and the grain sorghum supply-demand balance sheets and then came up with what they found. I think overall, if you stand back and look at what those reports came up with, they, in essence, showed increases in projected ending stocks for this current marketing year for corn and a little bit lower for soybeans, really no change, but probably the biggest surprise was for corn. For wheat, you also had the USDA coming in and increasing marginally the ending stocks for that crop as well. And, there's a bunch or a plethora of numbers there. In so many words, I think what's happening is that there's been a little bit weaker usage of grains in the feed sector, a little bit slower, fair amount slower exports, even in some cases a softening of ethanol usage. That comes right during a time when we have no other major crop problems in the world. Really, the biggest issue coming up as we're sitting right here would be how U.S. farmers are able to work their way through excessive moisture in parts of the Corn Belt, particularly in Nebraska, good parts of Iowa, and all across the Corn Belt, different spots, again, up into southern Minnesota. All over, we're looking at planting issues. But again, I think that the market, given that it's had times in the past where it grew worried about slow planting conditions and then saw tremendous recoveries in May, they're really kind of waiting to see what will happen. But yet, we have more rain forecast. There's just in the last few days here, we've seen fair amounts of moisture in the form of either rain or snow come through in states to the north and east of where we're at here in Kansas. So a lot going on, a lot of uncertainty yet to deal with. But at this time, slower exports for a lot of our U.S. crops, as well as slow down some of these other usage categories, has put us in I was going to say a sour mood or a pessimistic mood. I'm not sure how you'd characterize it, the market is, but it's not bullish. Those factors are all out in front of us that they're going to happen, and they're probably production-oriented right now.
Are there a couple of overriding factors then that are impacting the markets?
Well, I would kind of look at breaking each one of these crops out. Let's look at corn first. The USDA came out projected 92.8 million acres to be planted this year. And as we were just talking about, the question is, will they get all those acres planted? that 92.8 would be up from about 89.1 that we had this year. Let's say we had problems with on the edges of the Corn Belt. We ended up back at this year's planted acreage amount, again, 89.1 instead of that 92, 93 figure. Run that through with the same set of numbers. You're looking at a 14.3 or 4 billion bushel corn crop instead of a 14.9 knocking on the door of 15. So arguably 600 million bushels, and that can make a big difference on the bottom line. It's the difference between ending stocks of over 2 billion and if there's not a lot of rationing of usage, and 1.5. So that's a swing of 50 cents plus in the corn market. And really, are we going to be looking at ending stocks in fall 2019 of 13 plus % stocks to use, or something below 10, closer to 9.5? So that's really what we're looking at. So those are the factors to be looked at. Again, I think the USDA's projections for usage that have been coming through the winter months have proven, at least so far, to be more optimistic than the actual numbers have come in, and that's a slowing factor in the market. You know, we here in Kansas, Texas, Oklahoma, other parts of the country, we pay a lot of attention to grain sorghum. Grain sorghum numbers, again, with the USDA's acreage estimate, came out with about 5.13 million acres of grain sorghum planted, and that would be the lowest in at least since 2016, when we were at 6.6, 6.7, 5.6 back in 2017, 2018, 5.69, 5.1 would be a bit lower. The only silver lining to all that is that supply-demand balance sheet will be tightening up. So if that happens, instead of 60 million bushels of ending stocks, like the USDA is projecting for this current marketing year that will end on August 31st, we're down to something like 24 million bushels, 24, 25, if we actually get that cut back in acres. So we'll see how all that works out. For soybeans, there was some positive news that had come out. Well, at least when the USDA projected their ending stocks figures and supply-demand balance sheet, they didn't increase them. So we've been in the habit of increasing them. Still looking at 895 million bushels of carryout. That's more than double what we had last year at 438. That's almost triple what we had in 2016, 16-17 market year, when we had about 302. So a lot of soybeans. Worries we had in the market about South American production being lower have come about to some degree, and you see their stocks lower, et cetera. So it's having some degree of effect. But I just think when we've had short crops around the globe in wheat or in soybeans, these countries have shown, I guess they've responded very rationally. They've decided that rather than give up market share, they just go in and let their stocks dwindle down to lower levels and bet on next year or the coming crops, the next round, to make up for it. So hurts us this year, but puts the whole world market, and them in particular, in more of a vulnerable position. But again, that's 6, 8, 12 months away. So right now, it's just led us to a bearish situation. So can't say a lot about soybeans right now, other than soybeans is all wrapped up in this corn versus bean acreage planting issue. Again, the last set of numbers, about 84.6 million acres projected of U.S. soybeans for 2019. That would be down from about 89.2 what we had this year. Gosh, if instead of 84.6, we're at about 88. If we're the 3 million that we could be short on corn for planted acres, if that goes over into soybeans, acre for acre, well, then you're looking at a little bit of a tightening up situation. Not tightening up, pardon me. You'd be increasing soybean acres again and be back just about to where we have been this year for stocks to use. So you asked me what are the big points there? The big points, I think, are that we just haven't seen any positive news to change the direction of the market. Really, probably the most positive news is that on U.S.-China negotiations, there seems to be some progress. China, in those discussions, has indicated that if an agreement was met between the U.S. and China, they were going to be aggressive buyers of almost all ag commodities, grains and livestock. So, maybe that golden arrow that's out there that we're not accounting for, that impasse could come about and And gosh, maybe it would result in aggressive buying on the part of China. Right now, if that happened, I think for the market's sake, it would be a total surprise. Really, the question is, what's the timetable? Jeff, I think I know the timetable. It'll be right when everybody's sitting on tractors trying to get the crop in and too busy to pay attention to it. That'll probably be the exact time frame when there's an agreement that comes out, and that's probably May and June.
That kind of brings us to the question then of what's the marketing strategy for producers?
Well, so far I think most producers have either taken what they can with opportunities that have come up in basis that has narrowed, et cetera. A lot have been waiting for planting problems to provide support for feed grain and oilseed markets here in the spring. And so far, they've been disappointed. The markets have record bearish sell positions on the spec side, and they've been loath to unwind those for anything. And it makes sense intuitively, logically, that they're probably not going to unwind those positions until they actually see they have tangible evidence that wet conditions will delay U.S. corn plantings, probably affect acres, and start shifting acreage around. So another week, it'll be the 19th. Then it'll be the 26th, and you're getting pretty close to May the 1st. So I think within 2 or 3 weeks, we're probably getting at that tipping point where the market will have to pay attention to some of these issues.
So really a lot of, I guess, anxiousness over the next couple of weeks.
I think so. Anxiousness for sure on the part of farmers that are looking at, in a lot of places, at very wet soils and wondering about getting their crop in a timely manner. And to the degree that those anxieties are tangible out in the field and they affect planning decisions, then eventually those worries affect the supply-demand prospects in the market, and then you see more movement and volatility, I think.
Well, Dan, as always, we thank you for the update, and if somebody wants more information, they can always find that online.
Yes, we put these up on the Ag Manager website, www.agmanager.info.
That's K-State grain market economist Dan O'Brien. Again, his full market outlook can be found online at agmanager.info. This is Agriculture Today from the K-State Radio Network.
What is radon? Home exposure to radon gas is the leading cause of lung cancer death in the United States for non-smokers. In Kansas, 1 in 4 homes will test at or above the EPA action level. The Surgeon General recommends all homes be tested and fixed if necessary. Visit kansasradonprogram.org for more information. Test, fix, save a life. This message brought to you by the Kansas Radon Program, the Kansas Association of Broadcasters, and this station.
You're listening to Agriculture Today. If you've been tuned in recent weeks, you'll know that our guests now have been conducting a running series of analyses on what drives the top farms economically in the state of Kansas. And they've been looking at variable upon variable, trying to get at the bottom line of those factors that truly influence those better incomes that we find around Kansas from our farming and ranching. Gregg Ibendahl and Terry Griffin are back with us once again, both agricultural economists here at Kansas State University. And the thing that you looked at this time around was the effect of investing in farm machinery on the economic returns to farming, and those top farms in particular. But, Gregg, again, we'll ask you to set the table here in as far as this series and how you're defining top farms.
Yeah, what we did was we basically took a 10-year panel set of farms from Kansas, or from our Kansas Farm Management Program. They had to be in the program the last 10 years. And what we did was every year we ranked those farms in order from one to the bottom based on their net farm income per acre. And then we averaged those 10-year rankings to kind of get an overall ranking. And those farms that came in the top, we called our top farms, and so on until we get to our very, down at the very bottom end of the farms.
And once you identified them, then you're seeking those explanations as to why they are top farms, so to say.
Yeah, if you look at our initial results in our initial paper, you see there is quite a distribution between the very top farms and the very bottom farms, and we have most of our farms kind of bunched up in that middle section. But yeah, there are some big differences between those farms, and our idea with our current set of papers is we're trying to find reasons to explain actually why someone is continually a top farm versus why someone is maybe on the bottom half of the farms.
Well, so far, you've looked at the effect of farm size and the effect of debt structure on the returns to farming and ranching here in Kansas. And the latest entry here is on machinery investment. And Terry, this is right in your wheelhouse as a precision agricultural economist. But why look at this angle?
Well, originally, there was a study done in Illinois that we were sort of comparing against for one of our master's students. Gary Schnicke at University of Illinois, about 2001, I believe, compared to top third and bottom third farmers in Illinois, and the conclusion was yields didn't define the difference, the amount of inputs didn't define the difference, but how well the farmer controlled machinery cost was the difference. And that was sort of the springboard that we used to look at this. And just like the Precision Ag data set, we evaluated some of the same questions. If you remember, we had asked a question, does precision ag make you more profitable? Mm-hmm. And we came to the same conclusion here of, well, maybe the better question is, do farmers that have more money buy stuff? And that's sort of our new hypothesis that we're trying to evaluate in a follow-up study, because we are seeing that more profitable farmers, the farmers who have a higher rank in the profitability rankings, have more machinery.
Which is counter to what you intuitively thought going in. But how you got at that, Gregg, you put this in the context of machinery value per acre, correct?
Yeah, basically we looked at what their machinery investment is. Again, we're using economic depreciation as opposed to tax depreciation, so that should represent kind of what the market value is of their machinery on their farm. And basically once we come up with the total machinery value, divide by the number of crop acres, and that gave us a machinery value per acre. And as Terry mentioned, machinery is probably the second most expensive investment on a farm outside of land. So you'd think, well, if they're putting all this money into machinery, that should kind of lower the profitability, but we didn't see that at all.
And by the way, an important distinction that you made, you were evaluating that value on the management depreciation, if you will, as opposed to tax depreciation. A more realistic picture of the value of that machinery then?
Yeah, I think if you use tax depreciation, you really couldn't do this analysis very well, because most tax depreciation methods tend to write down the value of the machinery very quickly, sometimes even in the initial year of purchase. So if you did that, you wouldn't have a really good value of what those machinery values are. So by using economic depreciation, we have a pretty good feel for what the actual market value of those machines are on their farm.
All right. Well, right to it, what you found out, and you did, Terry, break this down region by region as you did with the previous studies, and you found some distinctive trends region by region?
We did, Eric. So, for instance, there was a trend going from east to west. So the typical farmer, let's say at the median in eastern Kansas, had about $300 per acre invested in machinery. In central Kansas, the median was about $220 invested in machinery, and in west Kansas, the median was about $170 invested in machinery. So there is definitely a trend going from east to west, and with less and less equipment per acre.
But we should point out, too, that it varies quite a bit across the set of farms that we have. Like in eastern Kansas, we got some farms that have, close to $500 of machinery per acre. So quite a difference between the very bottom and top range of investments.
But again, as you go from one end of the state to the other, what's influencing that difference region by region then?
Well, I would say it's mainly how intensively you can farm your farmland. So I would say in the eastern part of the state where there's more rain, you farm your ground more intensively, probably more corn acres. You're going to tend to have more machinery than we're out west where you got quite a bit of fallow come into play. So I think that's driving those differences we see across region.
But it's interesting in the write-up on this analysis that you put together that there are, of course, variations within the data, and there is evidence that, in fact, having more machinery can help one's profitability ranking. And that really is the interesting nugget in this, isn't it?
Yeah, I think you got to be careful the way you say that. So our results did show that the top farmers tended to have more machinery, but I don't know if that's really a factor in them actually being top farmers. I think in those cases, a lot of this, what we're seeing is a reverse causation, meaning the fact that you were profitable probably meant you went out and bought more machinery.
And another thing to keep in mind, too, as Gregg described early on, is these are farms in KFMA who've been a part of the KFMA system every year for the last 10 years. They're successful farms. And, anecdotally, you would back in the late 1980s, you would hear things like, well, good and bad farmers. If you survived the 1980s, you were a good farmer. And a lot of the questions that our listeners may be thinking about is, well, what's the difference between good and bad farmers? And that's not really what we're evaluating. We're looking at most profitable and least profitable farmers from a set of successful farms. Mm-hmm. And these are the results from that data.
So, again, your original thought that the higher level of farm machinery, the greater hindrance to profitability, and would lead to a lower farm ranking. You found basically that it doesn't hurt to have more machinery, and it could help in some circumstances. So this, you say, begs for more examination. Are you planning to look into this deeper?
No, we are. So it's a more complicated analysis. But what we need to do is look at the profitability before the machinery was acquired. The new hypothesis, and it goes back to the precision ag data set as well, is do people with money buy stuff as opposed to having possession of machinery increase profitability? It's two very different questions. It's a chicken and egg type of thing. But with our panel data set, I think we can evaluate that very question.
There's another factor I think that may be explaining why we see these results, which on the surface look like they should be reversed, and that also may indicate some level of how intensively the ground is being farmed. So the fact that you did have more machinery could be an indication that you were pushing your ground a little harder, maybe growing more crops, maybe more corn production, something like that. So that might be another factor in there as well, and hopefully we can find that out as we go along further with our analysis.
Well, you have plenty of charts and graphs to accompany the write-up on this particular analysis, and you'll be looking at this deeper and still more variables out there that you want to examine in this entire series.
Yeah, in fact, our next paper that we're going to look at, we're going to actually look, instead of machinery investment, we're going to look at actually the machinery cost per acre, and I can give you a little heads up about that one. In that one, we're going to find that even though we're seeing some differences in machinery investment, actually when it comes down to machinery cost, we're not really seeing any differences from the top to the bottom farms.
Which, again, is rather interesting, to say the least, and we'll be having you back to get into that in detail as it is fully fleshed out. There is an article on this topic, and it's, Terry, at the agmanager.info website.
It is. It's on the Ag Manager website, and Ag Manager as well as KSRE, we're tweeting it out as it becomes available. I would like to mention that we've got some really good interaction on Twitter. We've received emails with complimentary as well as critical comments that we've appreciated that will, in fact, help guide some next wave of analyses.
Yeah. And, in fact, again, this is the third analysis following up the identification of the top farms. So this whole series is proving illuminating in as far as farm management factors at work out there. What you're looking for this time around, top farms and the effect of investing in machinery, authored by our guests here. Have a look at that. It is at agmanager.info, and we're looking forward to your next entry in this series, gentlemen. Thanks for now for briefing us on the latest here.
Thanks, Eric.
Thanks, Eric.
Once more, hearing from Terry Griffin and Gregg Ibendahl, agricultural economists here at Kansas State University. agmanager.info to not only read up on this analysis, but the previous ones accompanying it as well, under the Top Farm series. You're listening to Agriculture Today. Now this break, after which we'll return with today's agricultural news headlines and more on the K-State Radio Network.
While many people know hunger is an issue in developing countries, it is also a problem in our own backyards. In 2010, 1 in 7 Kansans struggled to put adequate food on the table. 2 K-State research and extension programs are tackling this problem. The Family Nutrition Program and Expanded Food and Nutrition Education Program reach thousands of Kansans in more than 70 counties. They learn how to eat healthy with a low budget. For more information about these programs, visit ksre.ksu.edu.
Broadcasting from the campus of Kansas State University, this is Agriculture Today. Eric Atkinson with you. And now today's agricultural news headlines in brief for you, courtesy in part of DTN. Well, the USDA has released its 2017 Census of Agriculture. The USDA's Stephanie Ho takes a closer look here.
USDA has released its once every 5 years Census of Agriculture.
The power of the census is the ability to visualize and understand important change for key topics in agriculture at the national, state, and county level.
That was Agricultural Statistics Board Chair Joe Parsons, who says the 2017 Ag Census contains more than 6 million unique pieces of data.
There were 2.04 million farms and ranches. That's down 3.2% from 2012.
He says there were roughly 900 million acres in the country devoted to agricultural uses.
And it's roughly made up of about equal parts permanent pasture and cropland, each at about 400 million acres apiece, and then about another 100 million that's woodland and other uses.
With more than 6 million data points, you'll probably prefer to look at the results, plus maps, charts, and other data tools online. The web address is nas.usda.gov/ag census. This is Stephanie Ho for the U.S. Department of Agriculture in Washington, D.C.
Breaking out a few Kansas census numbers from the overall census. In 2017, the number of farms in the state was at 58,569, down 5% from the 2012 census. Land in farms at 45.8 million acres, down 1% from that reported the 5 years previous. And the average size of the farm in Kansas was 781 acres, up 5%, or 34 acres, up from 2012. The total value of agricultural products sold in 2017 in Kansas, $18.8 billion, up 2% from 2012. Of the total value of production, 66% originated from livestock and 34% from crop production. During 2017, the average age of producers was just over 58 years compared to 56.5 years in 2012. The number of young producers, that defined as age 35 or less, was 9,616, or 10% of all producers, and the number of female producers was 32,682, or 34% of all producers. Those just a few of the many points of data in the census for Kansas and the U.S. from the U.S. Department of Agriculture. To see the entire census report, again, go to nas.usda.gov/ag census. Vietnam's action to ban imports of glyphosate has drawn criticism from U.S. government officials who defended the safety of the widely used herbicide and raised concerns about the impact of the ban on Vietnamese farmers. That decision has raised objections in Vietnam and the U.S., with USDA Secretary Sonny Perdue criticizing the decision by the Vietnamese Ministry of Agriculture and Rural Development. Quoting the Secretary, "We're disappointed in Vietnam's decision to ban glyphosate. That's a move that will have a devastating impact on global agricultural production." The Secretary went on to say on numerous occasions the USDA has shared scientific studies with the Ministry of Agriculture and Rural Development there from the EPA and other internationally recognized regulatory bodies, concluding that glyphosate is unlikely to pose a carcinogenic hazard to humans. This ban flies in the face of that scientific evidence, he says. Furthermore, said the Secretary, Vietnam has sidestepped its obligation to notify of this regulatory change to the World Trade Organization. You're listening to Agriculture Today. Now it's on to this week's edition of the Kansas Wheat Scoop. And standing by with that is Marcia Boswell. Marcia?
Spring has finally arrived, but what do you need to prioritize when it comes to your wheat crop? According to Dr. Romulo Lulato, K-State Wheat and Forage Extension Specialist, it's time to look out for first hollow stem and to consider applying fertilizer. As of now, if you are grazing cattle on wheat with the intention of growing it out for grain, you need to move them off of the wheat. Once your wheat reaches first hollow stem, you could face yield loss of about 1 to 5% a day, as long as the cattle remain on the wheat pasture. Dr. Lolato said at this time, a very tiny head starts to develop below the ground at the crown level. Once that tiny head starts moving up the stem, if we maintain cattle on the wheat pasture, The cattle are going to start eating and removing those tiny heads, and so our yield reduces dramatically. It is important to get cows off your wheat when the stems begin to hollow. When checking to see if your crop has reached first hollow stem, go to an ungrazed section of the same variety of wheat. Get a clump of wheat strands, slice the largest tiller of wheat down lengthwise, and if there is a dime-sized diameter, which is about 1.5 centimeters of hollow space, then the cows need to be pulled off. Dr. Lolato also said that he noticed what is almost 2 different wheat crops across the state. The wheat planted early is developing on time, looking great, and seems to be prospering. There was great soil moisture content at this early planting, a key part of the equation that has been missing during the last few production years. Unless May gets very hot very quickly, the outlook for the early planted wheat is looking positive. According to the National Agricultural Statistics Service, Kansas winter wheat is in good shape. More than half the crop is in good to excellent condition. Dr. Lolato says his concern is really with the other half. He said we were on time until about October 5th with the Kansas wheat crop, but with all the rainfall that we got in that month, that really held producers back. The rain delays in planting not only took a toll on wheat acreage, but also on the plants themselves. The late planted wheat is not performing quite as well. These plants are visibly struggling thanks to below average temperatures in the fall and winter, resulting in the crop not having much of a chance to tiller. Unfortunately, this means that the yield potential is not quite as high as the crop's early planted counterpart. Wheat farmers should aim for at least 75 to 80 tillers per square foot to maximize yield potential, and the late planted crop is falling short. These plants are developmentally delayed, and the risk of heat stress in going from a mild spring to a hot summer quickly is currently pretty high. Dr. Lolato says fertilizer is very important for any tillering that the crop might still have. We need to capitalize on as much tillering potential as possible. For more up-to-date information on the Kansas wheat crop, follow at KSU Wheat on Facebook and Twitter. For Kansas Wheat, I'm Marcia Boswell.
Thanks, Marcia. This reminder to listen to Agriculture Today anytime you choose via podcast. Visit agtoday.net, where you can listen on demand and find links to subscribe to the podcast via Apple Podcasts, Google Play, Stitcher Radio, and Spotify. Again, start at agtoday.net. This is the K-State Radio Network. Legal and financial concerns surround the day-to-day management of the agricultural industry. Producers, ag creditors, and USDA agencies rely on Kansas Agricultural Mediation Services. If you've received an adverse decision from the USDA or have an ag credit concern, call today 800-321-3276 or visit us online. Kansas Agricultural Mediation Services, exploring options, generating solutions. Agriculture Today concludes with K-State climatologist Mary Knapp, as we'll catch you up on the latest on Kansas agricultural weather. Mary joins us long distance today via phone from Great Bend, where she's on assignment. And Mary, another wild swing in our weather here in Kansas. A few days back we were in the 80s, many parts of the state, and then the cold and the wind checked in.
Right. Wednesday was probably our most dramatic day. The cold front began to reach its grip into northwestern Kansas, and our mesonet station at Cheyenne saw temperatures drop down to below freezing. It was 32. At the same time, our mesonet station near Ashland, Kansas, in southwest part of the state, was at 96. So that was the kind of gradient that you could see. Thursday morning, when temperatures were at 20, and this was about 6 o'clock in the morning, temperatures were at 20 up in Cheyenne, but you get down there in Columbus area in the Cherokee County region, and they were still at 62 because the temperature swing had not yet reached their area. So, again, pretty dramatic, and the winds to go along with it. We've had wind reports of over 50 miles an hour. So, yes, it was a very dramatic storm. We did not see quite the snow that some of our neighbors to the north did. Snowfall amounts in the 2-inch range in that northwest corner. It is interesting to note that this was a pretty heavy, wet snow. One report, 2 inches of snow had 0.8 of an inch of liquid with it, which is quite a bit more than we typically would see with a snow event.
And blizzard conditions in northwest Kansas because of the wind along with that snow. So tough going there for a few days. And critical here, the hours below freezing at certain locations around the state in as far as the impact on crops and vegetation.
Right. The hours below freezing were fairly dramatic. You get up in that northwest corner, and it will surprise no one that they were looking at 24 hours below freezing this morning. Actually, when you look at it, they've been about 48 hours because yesterday morning they had the same 24 hours below freezing. And that covers that pretty much that northwest corner from Sheridan all the way to Sherman and Cheyenne counties, Thomas County, all in that range. Numbers drop off as you move further east. In the Lorain area, we're looking at 12 hours as they had down at St. John. But when you get over to the Manhattan area, if you're in the Ashland Bottoms, it was about 4 hours, 5 hours. But you get up into the Rocky Ford, where it's down in a little bit more of a valley open area, and they had 7 hours below freezing. Get over to Miami County, only an hour. And while Cherokee County did hit the freezing mark, so they had a low of 32, it was a fairly brief one and didn't even amount to an hour below that level. So most of the vegetation is not advanced enough to have a lot of difficulty with it. The biggest risk will be flowering trees, where that temperature may have done a hit on the blossoms.
So how has all this impacted soil temperature readings around the state, Mary?
Well, one thing with that is that because of the saturated soils, and again we're looking at soil temperatures under cover, they have not dropped as much as you might think. Up in the Cheyenne County area, the current, as of 7:35 a.m., it was 37 degrees for the soil temperature. And that's a fairly nice buffer for that very cold temperature that they've had. So we're seeing in the northern tiers soil temperatures at the 2-inch in the upper 30s and get down into the southern parts of the state, south central. It's in the mid-40s. They get down into the southeast, and we're still seeing temperatures above 50. So still trying to make that mark up there where it'll be warm enough to get the corn or beans in the ground. And I actually talked to one of the researchers out here at Great Bend, and they will be putting soybeans in the ground today as one of their variety trials. So poor beans are going to be a little bit cold.
Yeah. Well, what is ahead then, the outlook, and there's more moisture in the offing, you say?
Well, the 6 to 10 day and 8 to 14 day outlook from the Climate Prediction Center. Let's talk temperature first, and those are both looking at being cooler than normal. So that doesn't necessarily mean another round of freezing temperatures, but we're expecting highs in the 60s and 70s, lows in the upper 30s to 40s, and that will be cooler than we would typically expect at this time of the year. For precipitation, the 6 to 10 day outlook favors a wetter than normal pattern, and that would be the period of April 17th through the 21st. As we carry it out a little bit further and look at the 8 to 14, the 19th through the 25th switches to a drier pattern. And again, given the very wet conditions that most of Kansas soils are experiencing at the current time, a dry pattern would not be unwelcome.
No question about that. However, for the next week or so, because of the off-and-on chances of rain and moderately cool temperatures for this time of the year, the dry down will be slow, so planting progress may be a bit spare in the days ahead.
Right, and that will be particularly true for any of the heavier soils or any soils that we've got quite a bit of residue on. They'll be slower to warm up and slower to dry down as well. And we should note that you wouldn't necessarily have to have normal or above normal moisture at this time of the year to keep those soils wet. In the Manhattan area, this time of the year, we would expect about 1/10 of an inch a day. If you look at a week's worth of moisture and you get 7/10 of an inch or 3/4 of an inch, that'll keep that surface pretty darn wet.
Yeah. All right, Mary, many thanks. And we'll touch base with you again next Friday.
Thanks, Eric.
That's Mary Knapp, climatologist with K-State Research and Extension. She's along with us each week to look at the Kansas agricultural weather scene. And that is our time for today and this week. Thanks for joining us, and please rejoin us on Monday, won't you? Eric Atkinson bidding you a good weekend for Agriculture Today over the K-State Radio Network.